Good morning. I'm Raleigh Flynn, the president of the Foreign Policy Research Institute, and I'd like to welcome you this morning. We have a very special briefing this morning on the future of U.S. strategic interests in the South Caucasus and some of the challenges and opportunities for the Biden administration and how they deal with this very important region. Before we get started, I'd like to give a very special thanks to our colleagues and our friends at the Atlantic Council of Georgia, and to say a special thank you to Ambassador Batu Kutelia and Ambassador Dato Sikarulidze for their help in organizing this particular event this morning. As we may have some folks on our event this morning who aren't familiar with FPRI, Foreign Policy Research Institute, I thought I'd say a few words about it. We are a non-partisan think tank, and we're based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, on the East Coast of the United States. And FPRI has been around since 1955. We were started by Robert Strauss Hupé, one of the leading geopolitical strategists of the 20th century, who was a professor at Penn and later a very long-serving U.S. ambassador who was a political appointee by both Republicans and Democrats, so very appropriate for a non-partisan organization like FPRI. We're committed to doing research and events. Our mission at its essence is education, to educate policymakers and to educate the general public in international affairs and national security as it intersects with international affairs. So before we get started, I'd also like to thank our members and our supporters and our board members at FPRI. We couldn't do the work we do without you. We are enormously grateful. And if any of you listening are not in one of those categories, I'd strongly urge you to join one of those categories and do support us. These events are free to you, but not free to us. I would also like to now turn the floor over to Miro Popkadze, who is an FPRI Eurasia Program Fellow. He was Georgian Ministry of Defense representative to the United States from 2015 to 2019. He also served as Assistant Defense Attaché at the Embassy of Georgia in the United States in Washington, D.C. He was a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council of Georgia in Tbilisi, and his research areas include Russian foreign policy, Eurasia security issues, and geopolitics of the Black Sea and the Caucasus region. We're very fortunate to have him here today, and I will turn over the floor to Miro.
Thank you very much, Raleigh, for your kind introduction. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us for this very important and timely event discussing United States interest in the South Caucasus and state of democracy in Georgia, and challenges and opportunities Biden administration may face in the region. I think before we move forward, we need to step back and have a brief overview of United States engagement in the region. After the end of the Cold War, United States invested immensely in Georgia's democratic development and transformation. After Georgia got independent, it was a failed state, when the United States forged a relationship with Georgia, Georgia kind of came along, and in a very short period of time, Georgia really made success. The United States helped Georgia to strengthen democratic institutions, civil society, free media environment while protecting Georgia's sovereignty and territorial integrity. And for quite some time, Georgia played very well. And the Georgia success story was not unnoticed in Europe and the United States, and Georgia was embraced, and the West was helping Georgia to integrate further into the Western institutions. But Georgia's success also remained unnoticed in Russia, as Moscow grew increasingly concerned about Georgia's success, and in 2008, actually, it invaded Georgia, and 20% of Georgia's territory still remains occupied. But Russia also used wide and continues to use wide range of hybrid tools and tactics to undermine Georgian democracy. It has used borderization, propaganda campaign, cyber attacks, and also it repeatedly funded NGOs and political parties to undermine Georgian democracy from within, while trying to uproot Western values and principles taking root in Georgia. And Georgians actually made remarkable thing. First time in the region in 2012, they managed to change power through democratic means. In the past 20 years, Georgia was repeatedly challenged, as I said, tested externally and internally, but it still managed to somehow succeed. But in the recent years, we see really very unfortunate events taking place in Georgia. We see some democratic backsliding and some setbacks. So to discuss these issues further, what happened to Georgia and how Georgian thrive, and the pace for further integration into the West and democratic consolidation slowed. We have invited esteemed group of Georgian experts from the expert society, from a think tank community, who can help us understand these issues. Today we have invited Eka Gigauri, who is executive director at the Transparency International of Georgia. We have Nino Dolidze, who is executive director at the International Society for Fair Elections and Democracy. We have Nino Evgenidze, who is executive director at the Economic Policy Research Center, and last but not least, Georgi Muchaidze, who is executive director at Atlantic Council of Georgia. So each of the speakers will make remarks for 5 minutes, and then we will have a Q&A session. And they will focus the specifics of their work and what they see in their spaces. So with this, I would like to turn over to Eka Gigauri and ask her following question. We saw Georgia had the very crucial elections 2 days ago, and by many it was referred as a referendum on legitimacy of the government. So why was this election so important, and what do you think the outcome of this election will impact Georgia's ability to meet and overcome challenges internally and externally? Over to you, Eka.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for organizing this interesting event. So, yes, I think that we should recall what happened in Georgia after the parliamentary elections, right? So we had quite problematic parliamentary elections last year. And after these problematic elections, we all observed the at least 7-month crisis in Georgia. And at that time, we all actually recognized that actually we have problematic elections because we don't have the functioning institutions in Georgia. And most of these institutions are captured by one political party, and the person behind this, the ruling party, Mr. Ivanishvili. And so apparently they can't resist to the wishes of the ruling party, because when it comes to the violations of the elections, we could not see, during the elections, we could not see that these institutions, starting with the Ministry of Interior and ending with the Central Election Commission, so they did not react properly on all those violations. And that's why the population in Georgia, majority of them, I would say, because they supported the opposition altogether, so the opposition altogether got more support than the ruling party, so had the concerns about the results of the elections, and there were many questions how those violations actually affected the results of the elections. And after that, the political parties agreed on particular steps which are necessary in order to hold more high quality elections, like democratic elections in this country. And also these steps could be considered as a kind of way forward for Georgia. And many international experts and also the official representatives from the European Union and also from the US, they considered this agreement between the parties, so the steps on which there was the agreement, so as a kind of steps which will bring Georgia closer to NATO and EU. Unfortunately, after some times, the ruling party annulled this agreement, and so we actually hold these local elections when we had the crisis in the country. So when we speak about the referendum, yeah, so for the opposition, it was a referendum. So this was the message that was articulated from the opposition, saying that, okay, now during these elections, we should see whether the ruling party has enough support and whether those results that the ruling party had during the parliamentary elections were correct and so on. So unfortunately, again, I should say, and this is not only what TI Georgia says, we had 300 observers during the elections, also the ODIHR mission and the mission from the Council of Europe and other international monitoring missions said that these were again very problematic elections. We had the abuse of the state resources, we had the threatening of the candidates, we had there was no clear line between the government and the party. And so but at the same time, we can say that still in many districts, because these were like the local elections, in many districts we see that the opposition is leading. Together, like, the whole opposition is leading. So it means that in spite of the fact that, there is no political will from the government to implement the democratic reforms and to hold high quality elections, still the Georgian population fighting for the democracy, they despite of the threats, they participate in the elections, and they are choosing the multi-party democracy in this country. So when asking what might be, what kind of country might be the good partner for the Biden's administration and for any administrations, for any US administrations, I would say that Georgia, with the independent institutions, with the political elite, which can be trusted by the international community, and also by the people who understand what is democracy. So, and I would say that we have won at this moment. we have people, these like really very motivated people fighting for the democracy in this country. And unfortunately, we don't have the ruling elite which wants to put country or the lead country in the right direction. So, and I think that here, definitely, this message that we always hear from our Western partners and from the US administration that they support the people of Georgia, first of all, right? So this is very, very important to have all the time, this kind of message, but also the actions which will back the wishes of Georgian public, right? Because in spite of this big desire from the civil society, from several from other groups, from the public, that to have the independent institutions to really go closer to NATO and EU, we don't see the particular actions from the side of the ruling party to implement the democratic reforms, and again, as I said, to make sure that the Georgian path towards the NATO and EU is irreversible. So that's why I think that at this moment, and we are, of course, very thankful for the U.S. administration, because all administrations, again, because they invested lots of money in our independent institutions, and lots of political support was given to have the independent institutions in this country. I think that this is the moment now when the actions from our Western friends might be revised, and these actions might be more strict towards the ruling elite, because this is definite. If before it was said that, okay, so we still need to see what the Georgian people want during these elections. Definitely, we can see that the Georgian people chooses the multi-party democracy in this country. However, due to the lack of independent institutions and lack of political will, it is difficult to reach this goal. Thank you.
Eka, thank you very much for your excellent remarks. It's very, very, very thoughtful and very interesting, especially for our audience. Now, I would like to move to Nino Dolidze, and I would like to ask this question to you. Given the role of your organization in terms of monitoring the pre-election period and election processes, so what kind of inconsistencies specifically did you see that could affect the outcome of the elections? Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. Hello, everybody. First of all, it's my great pleasure to be here today and speaking about Georgia's democracy and elections, what we have on October 2nd, because yes, these elections were really critical for our country, because it was not ordinary municipal elections, but it was rather test for our, another test for our democratic development, because after parliamentary elections last year, we had quite long political crisis. So I would like to very much agree with Eka that although we had many problems during these elections, I still think that it was promising elections, because people of Georgia, I mean voters, really showed how they are more developed than the systems what we have, because they really supported, despite pressure, intimidation, they supported multi-party democracy, which is again very promising for our country. As for the monitoring and our findings, so ISPED has been monitoring these elections from June 1st. We are in order to assess elections, we are monitoring pre-election, election day, and post-election environment, because we believe that it's not only one day which defines the results, but pre-election environment mostly is crucial for election day and its results. So in pre-election period, what we have seen, it is that political parties really had right to campaign freely, but resources what ruling party had compared to opposition political parties, it's very different. And government was like governmental party had huge privilege in terms of financial as well as administrative resources. That's why in pre-election period, they were using all the administrative resources, what could be used in order to increase their supporters, like promising increase of salaries of people, canceling fines for the people, like millions of lari. So governmental party, ruling party, Georgian Dream, really used all the resources they had, all the governmental resources for the party advantage, and they had we had engagement of civil servants in campaign and lots of using administrative resources. And as I said, in order to ensure equal participation of political parties in pre-election period, we didn't have like that. So governmental party was really privileged, and if we look at their finances, donations, what they received, and funds, what they spent for elections, is 2.5 more than any other party together, unified. Although besides use of administrative resources, we have unfortunately seen political dismissals of people from jobs. So those people who were supporting some of the opposition party, mostly former prime minister's party, they were unfortunately politically dismissed from their jobs who were involved in public services. And also in pre-election period, we have seen pressure on opposition candidates. So because municipal elections with its character very different from the parliamentary, it's easier in Georgian reality to have pressure, intimidation of people at the local level. Because when it comes to parliamentary elections, you cannot really threaten political leaders who are running for the parliamentary and they are already political party leaders. But at the local level, people who do not have that much support, are not that much visible and powerful, unfortunately, we have seen pressure on them. So some of them even withdrew their candidacy during pre-election environment. So this was very when we are talking about free and fair elections, we had problems whether it was free or not, because we have seen, unfortunately, intimidation and pressure on opposition candidates, their supporters, and also some of the state institution workers who were directly involved, they were wanted or not, directly involved in the campaign. When it comes to election day, considering previous elections, we focused on two directions, on the election day, how it is administered by election administration, but also in order to, again, ask the question whether it was free or not, we have been also monitoring outside of polling station and polling places. And what we have found out was that election day inside polling stations was more or less calm. At least people were going and voting freely, but what we have seen outside the polling station, again, pressure of voters. We have alleged vote buying, several cases when our observers saw how money was given to people for voting. We had 7 cases of that. And also we have the cases that people were tracked. Some of the party coordinators were tracking people who came to vote or who didn't. So when it comes again, how the quality of these elections, we can say, and most of the international organizations assess the same way, that technical part of administering elections at the election polling stations was more or less good, but the side, which is whether it was free or not for the people, we again had the problem that people were pressured to go and vote, and they were tracked outside. And finally, I want to say that we are even now observing the result tabulation at the District Election Commission. We have lots of complaints, more than 300 complaints, where we again, like last year, have the problem of balances of the protocols, etc., etc. So it still raises the question if it was manipulation or not during the counting. So just to assess in general, we had electoral reform, which had some positive steps. We had political parties, lots of political parties campaigning, but still we have the problem in this country. Then people, the major principle of elections, which is to vote freely, it's not implemented. people still think that they are pressured or their vote secrecy is not like confident that someone will understand who they voted for. And this is the main challenge what we still are facing. But still, most of the citizens voted who they wanted for. At least we saw that there are some opposition candidates also, which is really good because we want Georgian people to vote for those who they support. We do not take any side. We just want our people to be voting freely. So this is very shortly, but I'm ready to answer your questions because we still continue observation. We have second rounds at the end of October, and it will be very important to observe pre-election environment for the runoffs, because now we may see even more cases of violence or at least pressure and intimidation. So thanks again, and I'm ready to answer your questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nino, for your excellent overview of the pre-election and election period. I would like to now move to Nino Evgenidze and ask actually a question. As Eka Gigauri mentioned at the beginning of her remarks, she mentioned the head of the former Prime Minister Bidzina Ivanishvili, Georgian billionaire, who allegedly left the politics. So I would like to ask this question to you. So is Bidzina Ivanishvili, who is in charge of the Georgian Dream Party? So we hear many reports and voices come from Georgia and from the region that there is a kind of oligarchic rule, still informal clans and informal power brokers are influencing election and democratic processes. So please, can you tell us what can you tell about the state capture and informal influences on election and overall Georgian democratic processes? Thank you.
Thank you so much, first of all, organizing this very timely discussion on Georgia, because, you know, my colleagues already talked about what was going just like 3 days ago in Georgia and how what kind of steps of the current government of Georgia is making for backsliding the Georgian democracy. And as you well mentioned, that we should address the elephant in the room, which is the informal ruler of our country and the men who captured the state and captured all institutions and influenced the state institutions by individuals from the outside of the constitutional framework of Georgia. None of the prominently important positions of the state, such as, for example, Ministry of the Internal Affairs, Ministry of Defense, Health Minister, head of the state security services are run by career politicians or the technocrats. Almost all more or less important government positions are held by the individuals who are sharing a very specific background in their biography, which ties them to the same private companies and organizations owned by the former Prime Minister and billionaire Bidzina Ivanishvili. Despite being officially retired from politics, this person and he's encouraged omnipresent in every aspect of Georgian politics. This is the very definition of the state capture, a type of the systematic political corruption in which private interests significantly influence a state decision-making process to their own advantage. I just want to, very shortly, address your attention to the scandal, what's happened in wiretapping scandal in Georgia, and again to underline what is going right now in Georgia looks like, and it's very similar what Putin did in Russia when he was attacking the free media. And a few months ago, 55 journalists were attacked and one died during this a homophobic rally in Tbilisi, and he attacks all media owners in this country, and all media owners are under the investigation. All main political party leaders are under the investigation here in this country, and elections and the Saakashvili's return and his arrest grabbed all the headlines, but we have to mention again that another recent scandal, unprecedented even for such a troubled country as Georgia. Yesterday, even the representative group of the ambassadors of the diplomatic corps accredited in Georgia met with the foreign minister David Zalgaliani and presented their grave concerns regarding diplomats and embassies, personal massive wiretapping by Georgian security services. A serious breach of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations of 1961. The group included a US ambassador, EU ambassador to Georgia, Japanese ambassador, and some other representatives from the different embassies. When you have ambassadors of the main Western partners of Georgia tweeting their protests about the unfair treatment they get in Georgia, how it might be compatible with a pompous declaration about the rule of law or a serious progress on the Euro-Atlantic integration path of Georgia. In this context, it's especially important to understand that one of the traditional tactics of the Russian propaganda is to portray Georgia as a basket of the problems for the West and troubled country which cannot be a reliable partner for the EU and NATO. And before it was only concern of the civil society organizations or the watchdog like we do, that's saying that their Georgian Dream government, the current government, and the Bidzina Ivanishvili, they are playing, the Putin's role, or they're making the Putin's dream true into Georgia. This is a real, fact that whatever they're doing in Georgia for backsliding us from the democracy is a real example and the sad story what is going in our country right now. And on the Russia role, it's widely known that Tbilisi's pro-Western foreign policy agenda and aspiration to join the European and Euro-Atlantic space are seen by the Kremlin as a major security threat. And the Kremlin understands that the consolidation of the Western-style democratic system with a transparent and strong institutions in Georgia would represent a direct and visible contrast to the Russian authoritarian system, giving a very strong potential intensive to other states to follow the Georgian example. And unfortunately, last 8 years, the current Georgian government, they were again, step by step, taking Georgia far away from the the Euro-Atlantic and Western families. And the Kremlin is treating Georgia as an integral part of the Russia's natural sphere of influence in the near abroad, which, according to the Russian doctrine, grants the Moscow a right of veto over Tbilisi's foreign policy trajectory. And in this global, not very positive, a geopolitical situation for Georgia, again, we need the Western support to fight against this, the 21st century disease when we're talking about the kleptocracy and oligarchy, because what Russia is doing, it's just exporting, this kind of kleptocratic and authoritarianism in the, of course, they're testing first in a very frontline states of democracies like Georgia, Ukraine, and some other countries. And as I think Eka was talking about this, that we should come with a real, steps taken from the West when it comes to the fighting against this kleptocratic and the oligarchic regimes. And on this direction, I only see the personal sanctions against the oligarch Ivanishvili and his family members. Otherwise, I mean, he doesn't care about his ministers or some other persons who might be the persons to be in this kind of sanction list, but it should be the direct sanctions against himself, who is the main person who is undermining the Georgia's democracy democracy. And for Georgia, being a democratic country is a part of our national security agenda. I will stop here, and if you have like some other questions later, would love to answer, of course.
Yeah, well, thank you, Nino, for an excellent overview of the dynamic Georgian internal political dynamics. Actually, it's very sad to hear this story when we remember Georgia was considered as a model for countries in transition a decade ago. So now I would like to move to Georgi Muchaidze and ask the following question. While United States and Georgia forged strong relationship in military and defense sector, main pillars of the relationship still remained democracy and Georgia's democratization. European Union's engagement in Georgia last year after the election, Georgia had a political crisis, also showcased how much Europeans and the collective West as a whole is committed to Georgian democracy. So how do you think this challenging political situation in Georgia and this the democratic backsliding and rising oligarchic rule will influence Georgia's thrive towards Western institutions such as NATO and European Union, and what do you think can be done to remedy the problems and kind of recharge Georgia's move towards the West? Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very pertinent question. First of all, let me say a couple of things regarding the elections, because also I was an observer, and when they are observing around 10%, and I'd rather concentrate on the second part of the question, because everybody knows that our democratic backsliding will certainly influence negatively our way forward in terms of the NATO and EU integration. And the second part is very important of your question: what the West and United States especially can do to reverse this course and kind of boost the chances for our democracy to mature and not to get degraded as it's happening right now. So first, let me say that unfortunately we have a trend of the deterioration in the democratic standards of conducting the elections. And the thing is that election process, as many observers underlined, starts much before the election day, and the pre-election environment plays a major role in determining whether elections are free and fair. So while we had this, the joint OSCE-led international observation mission stating that they found that the legal framework was conducive to holding democratic elections and it was more or less well administered, it also stated that many opposition candidates withdrew from the race, and a number of them reportedly were under pressure from the ruling party. Then we had, European Parliament head of the observer team declaring that the pre-electoral environment, however competitive, did not provide a level playing field for the contesting parties and candidates. And he also underlined the widespread and consistent allegations for pressure on civil servants, misuse of administrative resources, and huge imbalances of financial means. I think the transparency is very international found, and it's very important finding that altogether, whatever the opposition spent for the election period, the ruling party spent 2.5 times more finances than the all opposition spent together. And then we had the head of the Council of Europe, Congress of Local Regional Authorities, observer delegation mission stating that the election was a missed opportunity for local democracy in Georgia. And then if we refer also to the US Embassy statements, said that in many towns and villages, pressure against teachers, law enforcement officers, and other public sector workers reportedly interfered with their ability to exercise their free choice on election day. So if we kind of sum all these assessments, the international observers' verdict seems to be that elections were partially free, but not really fair. So, and when we were talking about also the concrete, the breaches that, as I told you, maybe my personal experience would be relevant in this respect, as I observed a number of polling stations during these elections and had a direct contact with 10 heads of the precinct electoral commissions, most of them incompetent or reluctant to follow a simple legal procedure on accepting the written complaints. Only after continuous demands, they were making calls to their superiors and then were acting only on their instructions and not based on the legislation. So here the point is that whatever way, we are going to streamline, the legislation, if it's not acting upon during the time that it should be implemented, that does not really make much sense. And around several polling stations, there were intimidating presence of muscular males who seemed to be watching over who was entering the polling station and were greeting some of the voters. And in these cases, police was either absent or not interfering at all. And in 9 out of 10 polling stations I observed, they had excessive number of the voting ballots in several packages. So some with no numbers attached, and they had also bottom corner folded. So after inquiring, I was told by the Electoral Commission heads that if used for voting, they would have been declared annulled during the vote counting. So this is the actual situation what happened in the ground. Now, how the US can influence these things? I think that it is important that whichever party is there, and whichever party is ruling and not implementing these reforms and not following the rule of law, they had to pay the political price. And I think the EU made a good example, gave a good example when they made conditional their financial support and they withdrew the funding when the reforms were not enacted. Make no mistake, 2/3 of the Georgian population are very pro-Western. And if the statement, like the statement from the United States Embassy, is continuously made that those, actions that were done, during these elections were not consistent with Euro-Atlantic values, and when the, population sees that there are less funding, there are less support, there are less progress on the way of the NATO and the EU integration because of government not meeting the commitments, and they see that they are paying the political price. This is the only way to really influence the also the actions of the government and also the mind of the citizens. And I think that these elections have shown the shift in the sympathies of the population, as we see many of the big cities, as we know, the cities are the dwelling places of the middle class. So they are, changing their mind, and they're seeing more and more importance of having a level playing ground and having some competition in the political field. So I think the US and European Union can very much influence this trend if there is more pressure put in terms of the better implementation of the reforms, especially the security sector reform and the court reform, because influenced by the Soviet mental legacy, current ruling party continues to equate politicization of special services, law enforcement bodies, and the courts with the efficient governance. So until this kind of the system is not dismantled and the effective comprehensive reform is not carried out, we will continue to face these challenges, which certainly can degrade our already very troubled democracy into autocracy. Thank you for your attention.
Georgi, thank you very much for very, very interesting remarks. As you mentioned, I think in five big cities, the opposition won the election, so they will have majorities in municipal councils. So I would like to ask you all. So this is as I know, this is the first time in Georgian history in recent of democratic development. And so what consequences do you think this will have? So having 5 big cities under the opposition majorities. Please.
I did not say they have already won, but in some of the cities they are leading, and so it's a good indication. As I said, the middle class is dwelling there. So, and there is lesser possibility for whatever intimidation is happening in the remote villages and districts. You know, in the big cities, it's much more difficult to do it, and we have the middle class there, and you know, they are more secured in terms of the financial resources, so they are more freedom in terms of making their choice. So this is, I think that this is a very strong trend. When the electorate is fed up already, you know, dominance of the single party rule, and I think that it's not to the good, but it's to the detriment of the country. And I think if this tendency is reinforced and supported to have more competitive, you know, level playing field, then I think that we will be much better off, and we will have, you know, hopefully the state capture process being reversed. And I think in this respect, much bolder actions need to be made. I agree with Nino that, you know, there needs to be much bold actions taken in regards with the financial support, in regards with the statements, in regards with the naming and shaming, you know. So we, when there are the very concrete facts, you know, there must be hopefully consolidated statements and actions, both from the US side and European Union. I think there must be more scrutiny, you know. If certain deliverables are not met, there should be very strict, you know, actions, the statements made from the both of the sides, the European Union and the United States as well.
Yeah, well, Georgi, thank you very much. Biden's new administration has formulated its foreign policy priorities, and one of the main pillars of Biden's foreign policy is democracy support around the world, democracy promotion, in a sense. While his predecessor Donald Trump relied more on if we say more how that's predictability and stability. So since we have already six months new administration, or 10 months, so do we see any changes in terms of approaching democratic developments in the country, in the region? I would like to ask this question to Eka Grigor, please. Any changes in policy, any visible steps, anything we can feel at this point?
I think that it's now it's very early to. You mean from the government, from the Georgian government, right?
Yes. No. I mean any changes from the American side in general. Why? Because one of the priorities in general of the new administration is to support democracies around the world, and Georgia is the young democracy who's been suffering in recent years because of the internal challenges, external challenges. We see any changes? Because you rightly mentioned the West needs to revise its policies. So I want to build on to your statement and ask you this question.
So at this moment, I think it's very early to see anything. From one side, of course, the U.S. administration as I understand it, it is very important, will continue to support the Georgian people and continue to support the capacity building of our institutions. For instance, judiciary, the Central Election Commission, and different, like, you know, the strengthening of for instance, the strengthening of the oversight functions of the parliament, which is very important. And I think that the US administration should continue doing this, but at the same time, it became obvious that there is just no political will to have the independent institutions. And Nino rightly mentioned, and I also mentioned in my introductory remarks, that you know, our institutions are captured. Like, you know, we have heads of the institutions who were the personal servants of Mr. Ivanishvili, like, you know, the bodyguard, the personal doctor, and so on. So when having such individuals who are not politicians, right? So it's very difficult to expect from them that they will resist to the wishes of Mr. Ivanishvili of the ruling party. So that's why I think we all should find the ways how to influence the like those who are in charge of decision making, like, you know, better or more effectively. For instance, when it comes to the judiciary, and it is like, you know, number one issue, I would say, in Georgia. We could have everything the same. With the better the judiciary, we could, like, you know, do or act much better, right? So as a country, or perform better as a country. And so, and there was the idea, for instance, to introduce the targeted sanctions or travel bans for particular judges involved in corruption, involved in high-profile cases and politically motivated investigations, right? So when saying that, like, you know, we need some more like different actions, I meaning this, because we might, for instance, with the electoral reform, right? So there was from the beginning, the ruling party said that they are going to change something in the electoral legislation. There were some changes which were positive, but, like, you know, the biggest issue, which is the independence of the Central Election Commission, which would be chaired by the person elected by involvement of many parties, you know, that did not happen. And it was in the law, but there was no political will to elect the person, or to sit at one table to, like, you know, agree on one person and to, like, you know, elect this person, right? So, and again, this person is supported only by one party. So that's why when I'm saying this, so now it looks like everyone realized what does it mean to deal with the government which is ruled by the oligarch, by the person who owns the fortune, and there is no one in the country who is richer than he is, right? So, and he has this, like, 1/3 of his fortune is 1/3 of Georgia's budget, right? So I think that now everyone realized that this is a challenge for Georgia, and from one side it's very important to support the people, but from the other side it is very important to push the ruling elite to change something and to, like, share the power. And so I think that especially now before the runoffs, it will be very important to send a clear message and to maybe to decide on some particular actions, strict actions, in order to make sure that the runoffs will be held in a better, like, you know, way, because again, all these people will be under the intimidation and threats. I mean, in the regions, especially the citizens and the candidates and so on. And so again, we might end up with the concentration of power in the hands of one party, right? Because, like, you know, okay, again, in big cities there are runoffs, but only in one city there is the majority for the opposition, and in two cities. I'm sorry, in two cities, and in others there are runoffs, and we might have the same result. So we need like really this multi-party democracy. We need the power sharing. We need the independent institutions. And again, people are fighting for this. Really, like people are fighting for this. Maybe we don't have violent demonstrations, like but people try to participate in voting and in the elections and vote for this. And this is already second time when the Georgian population did this. So I think that in this we really need the support and backing from our Western partners. But again, so it's maybe the action should be different.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for very, very interesting points you just made. Unfortunately, our time is coming to an end, and we need to close this session. I would like to thank you, each of you, for joining us for today. And actually, this was very, very, very interesting and very comprehensive overview of what's going on in Georgia. And I'm glad that our audience here in the United States and Europe are really hearing, and hopefully international community will stand with Georgian people and help Georgia thrive as a democracy again. So I would like to turn over this to my colleague Maya to lead another panel. So thank you very much all for joining all the panelists. Thank you.